Okay. There you go. I will call the regular meeting of the Springfield Economic Development Agency to order and ask for roll call, please.
Board Member Van Gordon.
Here.
Board Member Pitts.
Here.
Board Member Moe.
Here.
Board Member Rodley.
Here.
Board Member Stair.
Here.
Chair Woodrow.
Here.
Board Member Piscineri.
I'm here. Thank you.
And Board Member Burney.
I'm here, thank you.
As we begin our meeting tonight, I would like to ask members of the audience who are joining us by phone or online to please keep yourselves on mute until you are called to provide public testimony. There will be one time designated for public testimony this evening and will be listed as business from the audience. If you are joining us online with a tablet, smartphone, or computer and wish to speak during that time, please use the raise hand feature. When you are called upon, please state your name, ward or general location, and the subject you would like to speak about. To provide public testimony, please use the raised hand feature when the agenda item is called. First item, please.
Here, the first item is business from the audience. So if folks would like to use the raise hand feature, we'll get you in the queue.
Neil, can I flag something here? Oh, never mind. I apologize. We thought we were running late, so I was afraid that we had an attendee who maybe got bad advice from me. I apologize. I'll mute. I see them now.
No problem. Chair, we have our first speaker. The first speaker is Michelle Emmons. And Michelle, you should be able to unmute your microphone.
Got it. Can you all hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. My name is Michelle Emmons, and I'm here tonight representing Willamette Riverkeeper. And I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to have us come out. We went on the walk, and we really appreciate the SEDA organizing the site visit that happened on October 8th. And also we appreciate the time that the city and SEDA members gave to respond to our prior letters. We still do have some concerns about the public process, and we hope that SEDA will continue to give assurance that you are critically evaluating necessary factors in regards to the RFQ process. We hope that you'll continue public engagement and transparency in the next steps of the RFQ process and project development. We do have a few questions about that. We've noted that the RFQ responses are due October 15th. And we are wondering when you will make these RFQ responses available for public review, or do we need to submit a public records request for those? We're also wondering when SEDA will accept public comment on the RFQs before making the final recommendations on December 6th. Those would be two great dates to have within the public's purview. And then after the final recommendations, we're looking for the timeline on the next steps. When will SEDA accept public comments on the project phases? And is there an opportunity for the public to, protest whatever the final project is that is chosen? And what is the process for that? In regards to the review of proposals, we hope that our letters have given you an outline for issues to address with potential developers and will help guide your analysis. And we're also curious to see how the issues we raised in those letters will be addressed going forward to secure open spaces, river access, stormwater, sustainability, climate change, and of course, impacts to salmon from water and light pollution. We understand that you see many of our concerns as part of the master development experience and references weighted criteria, but we do believe some of the issues that we brought up actually do and are part of all of the other pieces in the criteria as well. We did review the goals, tactics, and expectations chart, which is part of the agenda for today. In addition to the concerns that we've expressed here this evening, we do have some concerns around the refinement plan goal to promote a visual connection. And we ask you to please think about how a tall hotel or residential buildings will affect that, and also how the block pattern street grids and linear parks are consistent with a meandering river and riverbank. We hope that you'll promote suitable uses through the refinement plan goal 5. And we hope that you will actually impart a traffic analysis. And I think my time is done.
Yes. Thank you.
And Chair, as of now, it does not appear we have any other hands raised under business from the audience.
Okay. Next item.
Chair, your next item would be new business. We have one item under new business, the Glenwood Land Use Policies, Infrastructure and Development Process Timeline Overview. Courtney Griesel is here for the staff report.
Good evening. Pleasure to see everybody. I'm going to share my screen and then get us started because we have a little bit of time planned ahead, so we'll make most efficient use of it. Just do this screen share briefly. I think after a year, I'd have this down pat. Okay. Can folks see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Just make sure I can see all of you best I can. So for this evening, our goal really for this meeting is sort of the same as the agenda. So I thought it best to just sort of walk through what we're going to do here and what we hope to create. Ultimately, we have a relatively large number of staff that are going to participate, but our goal is to talk through the Glenwood broader opportunity and the jurisdiction, how we came into possession of Glenwood and the planning overview. And I know a lot of folks are, gosh, like I know this story, but we have this sense that it's even good for us as staff to retouch that overview, the why of how we're here, and the acknowledgement that for some folks it's an introduction, while other folks it's a refresher, and it's just good to bring it in at the same time. And I want to make sure, is my screen cropping off for some people?
It seems big. I mean, yeah.
I apologize. Let me see if I can't fix that because it looks odd to me as well. I'm going to try this one more time, different route. Is that better?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Sorry about that. Now I just have to move. It should not be this clunky. So we want to talk through the general refinement plan, the purpose, the goals. So start with the intention of the work and then drill that down into detailed discussion about the expectations of the policies, really letting ourselves get into some detail so that we can talk about some of what we're experiencing, what we might expect moving forward. And then when we make sort of generalized terms about refinement plans or setback areas or densities, we're at least talking about it all together in context of why. And then lastly, to bring it around to a discussion of, so what, now what? What does this mean in the context of the riverfront site? So because of the way we'll talk through it, I think the goal, if possible, as much as possible, is to hold questions to the end, just because we're going to volley a bit between staff. For this evening, we've got staff on to assist. We'll actually change speakers a couple different times. We have our current planning supervisor, Mark Rust, who will talk a bit about land use. Christina Kraz, our assistant city attorney, will help with process. Our managing civil engineer, Kyle Green, will do what he does best, which is remind us what goes in the ground and how it flows and moves. And then our senior planner, Molly Markarian, will help and talk through some of the detail, as well as our transportation planning engineer, Michael Liebler. So you'll get to hear from all of us, which we don't normally do to you, but it'll maybe at least be somewhat entertaining for several minutes. So I'll talk a little bit first about kind of where we've been. I look at people on the screen who know this far better than I. But I think for those who don't, it's still valuable to talk through just how long we've been at the work, but also where it started, which was with the community kind of raising their hand through a petition and saying they wanted to make this jurisdictional transfer under the jurisdiction of Eugene over to Springfield. And so, that took quite a bit of work on behalf of the council and the Board of County Commissioners and the community. And then here we are ultimately in 1998 with the jurisdiction actually coming over to Springfield. And then that means, here we go, we have to start doing real work and big work. And so the voters stepped up again and approved the urban renewal district. And the community really supported this, and the council said, let's move forward on updating the refinement plan. At the time, the refinement plan that we had was brought over from the city of Eugene. So it wasn't ours, and it wasn't really the community's at that time either. So then in 2008, the council made that investment and started that work with a really robust bit of community engagement. A lot of conversations, a lot of hard work, a lot of volunteer hours, and a lot of just dreaming about what Glenwood could be and what it would mean to get there. So that refinement plan, an initial phase of it is what we're going to talk through this evening. The refinement plan update is just for the phase 1 area, which we'll show. And it was adopted by council and commissioners in 2012. And then in the theme of time that it takes, the state acknowledged it 2 years later. That plan has been in place, has had some amendments, but it's really enabled us to see some of the outcomes we see now with hotels and expanded bakeries and new headquarter sites, and really even Franklin. It let us understand what Franklin ought to be when it was constructed. So we sort of mapped that out because it's just a good reminder and refresher for even some of us who weren't here in '98. I'm going to ask Christina Kras to jump in here and talk about the relationship of the refinement plan, because it's not the only one we have. And so it's always good to talk real quickly about how that plan fits into the big picture.
This is going to be the most condensed summary of Oregon land use law that you'll ever hear. So for those of you that have had a more extensive experience on the Planning Commission, for example, this will seem very brief, but hoping that for newer commissioners or as a refresher for long-serving commissioners, this will be a helpful context. So the Senate Bill 100 in Oregon established or directed the Land Conservation and Development Commission to develop statewide planning goals, and the legislation directed cities to develop comprehensive plans that are consistent with those goals. And so in the late 80s, by the end of 1986, all cities and counties in Oregon had established these comprehensive plans. The first one for the Eugene-Springfield area was a combined plan known as the Metropolitan Area General Plan, or Metro Plan for short. We've been in the process for the last decade or so of developing our own Springfield-specific comprehensive plan. We've adopted our own Springfield urban growth boundary and plan policy elements within that, specifically policies and inventories of land related to residential land and economic or employment land. We also have Springfield specific policies on urbanization, which is the process that properties go through to go from a rural environment to annexed urban development. Within, so sort of more specific pieces of the comprehensive plan are neighborhood refinement plans. The purpose of a comprehensive plan is to establish long-range policies. And so a neighborhood refinement plan adopts more specific long-range policies for specific parts of the city. Glenwood is one of our neighborhood area refinement plans. The downtown has its own refinement plan. Gateways is another one that has been most recently updated. The hospital Peace Health Development was a substantial overhaul of that gateway refinement plan, but we have them throughout the city from East Main to Kelly Butte that date back some as long ago as the 80s, and some have been amended just very recently. The other aspect of our comprehensive plan are the functional plans that we have, which take the policies and planning that happens through the inventories of residential land and economic development land, specific area policies from the neighborhood refinement plans, and then translates those into plans for our infrastructure. The transportation system plan is one that Springfield has adopted its own Springfield specific TSP in 2014. And then we have a public facilities and services plan that is still shared with Eugene under the Metro Plan umbrella, but we do our own Springfield specific planning for most of those public facilities and services. And then at a level below all of that are our development code regulations that implement those specific plan policies. So as you sort of go up in this ladder, we have to be able to find, development has to find consistency with these things. So at first, development has to be consistent with the development code. The development code has to be consistent with our comprehensive plan. Our comprehensive plan has to be internally consistent with the other pieces of the comprehensive plan. And then all of that has to be consistent with statewide planning goals. So you can see here how if something, for example, in a refinement plan changes, it may affect the inventory and the residential inventory and a plan policy element, for example, or it could affect the functional plan that implements the refinement plan policy. So these things are interrelated, and that is one place that the complexity comes from.
Thank you for that. I think we wanted to touch on this piece just because it's a gift of Oregon land use. But also it's just to say that the documents are all interrelated, and we experience this in a large number of areas of the community, but also developers that we work with are pretty accustomed to these related systems. And so it's not to flag it as something that's complicating or problematic, but just to flag the relationships. So when we talk about the refinement plan update specific to Glenwood, and sometimes I sort of affectionately refer to the shape as a pork chop, it's partly because of this shape that you see on the image, where it really is a pretty central and robust piece of a community asset. It's a significant neighborhood. It's right in the center of our region, and really an incredible opportunity. And so the phase 1 update focused on those riverfront areas to catalyze kind of the greatest point of opportunity for utilization, and also just doing healthy redevelopment, access to the river, those places that are critically important to the Glenwood community and neighborhood, but also larger regional neighborhood. And so those conversations, when we talk about the community engagement and where the policies came from, we have strength and confidence in those policies because of the amount of time and the investment of the community, the citizen advisory committees, the technical advisory committees, and the councils that occurred really over those 5+ years of process. And this was talking about detail, like all the way down to the nuts and bolts, and really not leaving any stone unturned, any topic undiscussed. And so when we talk about what the vision for the place is, we have a pretty firm picture, and the refinement plan reflects those because of all that community work and dedication and the prioritization. And so, you know, for this evening, what we really want to do is sort of unpack the refinement plan policies based on those starting community goals. So we can talk about how, you know, where we started and how we see getting there from a policy standpoint. So I won't go into these in great detail right now because staff will, but ultimately the goal outlined really 13 sort of big policies around what was important and the place and the sense and the feel of what this part of the community would become. And so these will be the elements that staff will talk through in more detail. This is also articulated in attachment 2 of the packet with some detail. And just know, as we're talking through these, we may put some of the orders slightly off, just so that we're not having staff volley back and forth too much, but are somewhat combined. And then as you're thinking about it, note any questions or places you want to make sure we revisit and talk about at the end. We'll try and get through this all at once, and then make time for questions at the conclusion. I am actually going to hand it over to Molly Riparian to start. And then folks, just tell me when you want me to advance slides.
Start. Good evening. So visual and physical connections from Franklin Boulevard to the river in Glenwood has long been a desire of the community and the Springfield City Council. So it should be no surprise that improving public connections to the river featured prevalently in the Glenwood Citizen Advisory Committee's visionary process for the Glenwood Refinement Plan. Throughout the project, we look for ways to strengthen physical and visual connections to the river, bringing people and activity to the riverfront. The arrangement of land uses, the street system, public open spaces, and design standards related to building form and height are intended to promote increased intensity of use while also promoting the development of physical public access for all to the riverfront and the protection of views for visual enjoyment. Next slide. Establishing inviting public spaces, including parks, plazas, and multi-use paths was also a goal for the future of Glenwood. As such, the central public park blocks and linear park and multi-use path are intended to support and enhance new high-density residential development and for the general public. They also add to the existing regional open space river corridor and are intended to promote tourism. The Glenwood Refinement Plan policies reflect that well-designed and located parks can also provide multifunctional spaces where opportunities to enhance natural resources and stormwater management can occur. Next slide. We received clear direction from the community and the City Council to restore, enhance, and protect the functions and values of natural resources and increase public awareness of those resources. So we sought ways to integrate the natural riparian and habitat functions in this urban setting and to maintain them as well-managed urban interface for infrastructure, open space, and recreational and educational opportunities for residents and visitors alike accessing the riverfront. Citywide, Riparian, Willamette Greenway and Riparian regulations stipulate development setbacks and restoration, enhancement, and protection of the riverbank and riparian areas, including limiting passive activities, passive recreational activities to the riverfront, such as delineating where only water-dependent and water-related development may occur, citing the multi-use path at the outermost edge, and stormwater management and outfalls. And I'll hand it over.
Good evening, commissioners. I'm Mark Rust, and I see Councilor Stair's hand up. I don't know if there was a question you wanted to interject with.
I'll wait till the end of the presentation. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks. So I'm going to touch here first on goal 5. This goal is intended to create a lively place with a mix of uses suitable to unique development opportunities in Glenwood. The vision for the land uses and the land use framework is intended to foster a regional market growth and provide options for living, working, shopping, service, and hospitality environments. The plan designations and the zoning established intended primary and secondary uses. There's 2 different primary zones, the residential mixed use, which is intended primarily for high density residential. And this would be higher than even our highest density today at a minimum of 50 dwelling units per acre. But it would also allow for a limited small scale retail, office, service, and educational uses which would be permitted if development as an integral part of the residential development. The second is the commercial mixed use. It's intended to primarily allow commercial and office employment with flexibility provided for also including high density residential. Next slide, please. This is goal 6, and it provides opportunities for development of a variety of housing types to meet the range of housing needs. The Glenwood Refinement Plan policies encourage incentivizing development, providing assistance to existing residents that would possibly be displaced by redevelopment, and offering opportunities for existing residents who qualify for new subsidized housing to relocate to such new housing units. And then the next slide, please. This goal 3 here, jumping back a little bit, this reinforces the unique identity and character by furthering the sense of place and distinctiveness within the area, mitigates visual impact of increased density and possible incompatibility of uses. The council has stressed that development should contribute to furthering a sense of place and distinctiveness within Glenwood. The unique impression and feel of the riverfront will be created in part by the mass, scale, and design of new buildings, the mix of uses, and the relationship between the public and private realm to create a walkable and active space. For example, there's no height limits, but considerations are provided for solar access, reducing the sense of looming buildings at the pedestrian scale, parking facilities that are screened or tucked under or behind structures, and that prioritize the valuable space for active uses. The codes implementing these policies establish development standards and building design standards that implement the Glenwood Refinement Plan vision goals. The standards describe how various elements should be incorporated into the building and site design clearly and objectively, but it is expected that the development community will apply its own creativity to build upon the principles expressed in the standards and create invigorating designs and attractive, livable, and viable developments. The code also builds upon several commonly accepted design principles, not a strict form-based code, but a hybrid code. Desired unique impressions and feel can be guided in part by design and development standards related to mass, scale, and design of new buildings, the mix of uses, and the relationship between the public and private realms. The Citizen Advisory Committee for the plan discussed on several occasions the form of taller structures necessary to accommodate desired levels of density and must consider solar access views and reducing the sense of the large massing and looming buildings at the pedestrian scale. The grid also orients development to the public realm to optimize the penetration of natural light to the buildings and public spaces. And with that, I'll hand it off to the next speaker.
Michael, I think that's you.
I'm unmuted, but I can't get my video going quite yet.
There you are. We see you.
Okay, I'm here. Hello, board members. The major components of the transportation system for the Greenland Refinement Plan are the Franklin Boulevard multimodal roundabout corridor and the riverfront roadway and multi-use path installations. As we all know, Franklin Boulevard is a major transportation corridor connecting downtown Springfield to the east across the river with the University of Oregon and downtown Eugene to the west along a current high-functioning, high-frequency lane transit district bus rapid transit MX line. Franklin Boulevard, in line with the Refinement Plan and City of Springfield Transportation System Plan, is being upgraded to a hybrid multimodal roundabout corridor with the first pair of roundabouts completed and phase 2 improvements extending to the west currently under design. Primary access to the Greenland Refinement Plan areas will be from north-south streets extending from the roundabouts. The proposed east-west riverfront street will provide access to the Willamette River for residents, visitors, and businesses. This roadway, in combination with the proposed riverfront multi-use path, provide for the long-standing public vision and goal of ensuring that the public and businesses can easily access the riverfront for recreational and transportation needs. Supporting Franklin Boulevard and the riverfront street are flexible interior north-south and east-west streets, providing for the vehicular roadways, bikeways, and pedestrian paths necessary for the connectivity associated with highly productive multimodal developments in line with refinement plan goals and standards. And with that, I will pass on to Kyle Green to talk about infrastructure.
Good evening, everyone. As Michael mentioned, I am Kyle Green, and I'm going to talk about Goal 11 on this slide, which is urban public infrastructure and services, specifically related to public wastewater and stormwater. As you can see, it's a little bit small, but you can see wastewater in purple as it currently exists, and stormwater in green in the northern Glenwood area there, inclusive of the SEDA property. And as far as sanitary sewer or wastewater, as it's also known, goes, there's currently no capacity issues in the what we call a trunk line that runs down Franklin. There are 8-inch lines that are provided at various points, both to the north and south side of Franklin, for future connection with capacity. This would go to current and future road right-of-ways. And then as far as stormwater management, the green line that does run along Franklin does not have capacity to serve all of this development that we're going to be looking at. And so there is some availability through the park blocks for some stormwater treatment and capacity depending on the terrain. There are currently three proposed new outfalls that would go to the river in this stretch west of the bridges. All stormwater would have to be treated, completely treated, whether it's from the public roads or from private development prior to discharging to the river. And the refinement plan does identify currently the need to capture the first 1 inch of rainfall in a 24-hour period through low impact development techniques. And there is also identified the use of the riparian setback area for stormwater treatment. And as we move forward in time, in 2023, we're looking at a new, what we call an MS4 permit, but it basically will have higher treatment and retention standards than what we currently have today, even in the refinement plan as listed. So with development, that will provide opportunities and potentially a few challenges to meet those, but it is exciting to be able to implement that. So for next slide, please. And then looking at, this relates to goal 7 and goal 8, protecting the public from potential hazards. And I also put this with the steward of natural resources. I think those come together. Molly talked about this a little bit about along the riverfront and the riparian areas and protecting that, but those areas also have floodplain, floodway, riparian setbacks, various development setbacks that you will hear about. And the main takeaway is all of that works together in concert to provide a nice space for the public, but also protect the public in those critical areas adjacent to the river. And that's all I have.
I'll not to put you on the spot, but before we, on the infrastructure piece, I just kind of want to flag where what we don't talk about here is power. But that partly has to do with our partnership with Springfield Utility Board as the power provider. And so that I just kind of want to flag that piece. Is there anything you can talk about there? Totally putting you on the spot, but
Sure. There has been some discussions with sub, and I don't want to go into the details, but they have been starting on plans to service this area. My understanding is that there will need to be some capacity upgrades to fully serve the developed area north of Franklin. And that would be for both power and water. That Springfield Utility Board would be the stewards of that. And so it is contemplated, but it is still a work in progress as far as I understand it.
me too. I think I just wanted to sort of flag that difference between city utilities and sub, and that being a place where the refinement plan assumes some coordination and pre-planning and investment that we all are kind of working through as well.
And one of the key aspects of that in the public facilities and services plan is a new substation to serve the Glenwood area, and sub and the city have been working together to just do the site approval for the construction of that substation. The Planning Commission issued its final decision, and the hearings official issued its final decision on that site plan after appeal and remand from the Land Use Board of Appeals. That happened over a year ago. And so we are slowly making progress on that piece of it, but that is one of many required components of the electric infrastructure in that area.
Thanks, that's a good update too. A lot of moving parts. So I actually am going to take the last couple slides here and sort of talk about how some of these pieces come together in an actual process, and even that discussion about coordination you know, with sub and other providers becomes important in how we facilitate the redevelopment, and the expectation within the refinement plan that there's going to need to be some thoughtful procedures in place, some ongoing engagement with existing property owners, businesses, and residents, and the ability to have what we consider pre-existing and non-conforming uses in this space that allow a use today to remain and continue to operate, but also still with the council and community's goal to create some efficiency in the redevelopment. So that does mean that there is a desire to see Glenwood redevelop and redevelop with some assurance into the future. And that is going to put some pressure on some of these existing uses that are non-conforming. And that pressure may feel clunky. It may feel frustrating, but what it will mean is that the city is in a position where we're needing to facilitate more conversations, sort of more concierge, if you will, on even the utilization of the plan and the process ahead to help people navigate that change. The plan also really focuses on employment opportunities and economic development. Looking at these sites in Glenwood and along the river is key employment lands or places that important campus type settings or office settings might occur, acknowledging that it's going to take quite a bit of the space to redevelop to create that market and that desired location. And we're starting to see some of that occur down on the Franklin South edge or McVeigh, where the Wildish site is now moving into the Warehouser parcel and redevelopment. And so that type of development is seen as something that may start to spur the next phases of development around it. And Warehouser is an example of a user who then looks at the code and finds some assurance in their investment because they see that the code articulates that the neighboring parcels will have to develop similarly or of a similar quality. The plan also really puts a strong focus and emphasis on the importance of Glenwood's regional history and contribution and the stories and how the community oriented to the river, and how important it therefore is that we continue that this development moving forward creates that access to the river again and really doesn't close it off, but creates this place where the community does get back to that water and gets to access it, stroll along it, and have these open spaces that are accessible and to all types of visitors, not just those that live there, but those who are visiting, dining, working, or recreating. Also important that we note that we can't know everything about this space. And so we do know that there are maybe significant artifacts on this space. There may be, there are significant places that we have yet to discover. And so in the process of redevelopment, the plan and our citywide policies really articulate the importance of being mindful of understanding, having surveys done and making sure that when significant community and cultural heritage stories and pieces are found, that we pause and go through that important process of determining significance. And then not lastly, from an important standpoint, but also Glenwood is seen as such a central location, and it's an incredible entry to Springfield and really also even Eugene. It's this gateway place. And so the public spaces are acknowledged to be future locations for art, future locations for that storytelling to happen in the public realm. And so we know that as we're working with developers and we're creating those public rights of ways and sidewalks and intersections, we will need to seek some important partnerships to make sure that we can enable future art installations. We can kind of create those opportunities to continue our storytelling and investments as we've done in other areas of the community. So I know that there are some questions. I want to move on. We have a couple more slides. I want to get through those really quick, and then we'll come into the questions and we can go back to some of those technical goal pieces if that works. So I want to bring this into the context of the site that SEDA currently owns, which is really why we're talking to the SEDA board, because you all are going to be directly and intrinsically impacted by how these plans function when it actually is time to put rubber to the road on development. And so I like this image because it's a place we all know so well that sometimes we forget how incredibly tied it is to some critical community assets between the neighboring properties, Homes for Good owned property for affordable land, the U of O campus. I mean, you can just about see everything from this central location, Interstate 5. It really is a very rare location anywhere in the state. And that doesn't even get to the fact that it sits right on the river. So it's a rare location. It's also a complicated location because of the proximity to all of those assets. It's complicating to be close to Interstate 5. We worry about traffic. It's complicating to be on the river because we really are mindful of how we impact the river and how the river impacts the site. And it's always complicated to be next to established neighborhoods. So that refinement plan has a lot of policies to try and manage that. And what we also know is when we drafted it, we got it mostly right, but not exactly right. And that's okay. It's because we can't always predict exactly what a developer is going to do or what a market's going to expect. So some of those detailed policies are going to need some adjustments. Just another sort of perspective of the site. So in that question of all those policies we talked about, we went through an exercise of sort of mapping out a conceptual land use sequence. And we did this with feedback from different experienced developers and experts in this kind of field of work. And so what we're showing here is not what will be the timeline, but what an anticipated, what a conceptual timeline could be to go from where we are today to actually moving forward with development in a site in Glenwood. And And assuming that some of this is done without concern from the developer. On some level, developers are going to want to take the time they need to take to make sure they feel confident and secure in the process, and that they have time to do the community engagement and have the conversations and test some of the absorption and the feasibility. And so this process sort of lays out some of that time. Obviously, it starts within the context of the riverfront site. So we have this discussion about a development agreement. Not every site that develops in Glenwood, obviously, is going to do a development agreement with us. So for those that are moving much faster, really what they're looking at is layering annexation agreements and master planning. And we expect some refinement plan amendments, and that's actually okay. That's sort of like the last 10% of the process where we take it and we really polish it up and we get the code just right for what actually is going to occur. And so those processes overall can go as fast as 1.5 years, and it could take a couple years. It kind of depends on how significant. And really, a patient developer will be taking each of those months to do that work. It's meaningful to them, and it won't feel like it's dragging on. And then we really move into that site plan and phase. We lay this out because we just sort of want to map out those steps, those possible processes, and acknowledge that on a really large, complicated site, we could be looking at a 5-year process. And that's what we prepare ourselves, just knowing that the best thing we can do is be responsive to a developer seeing opportunity to make slight adjustments that still meet the community's goals. Christina, is there anything that I might want to flag on this that
I think you captured it really well. I'm sure the commissioners will have questions as we move into that. And I'm happy to help answer those if they are legal or if I can help.
Yeah, I think we're ready to kind of jump into those questions. If folks, and I sense that board member Stair has definitely had his hand up the longest.
Thanks, Courtney, and thanks for the presentation. I'd also like to thank Michelle Emmons for coming out and speaking on behalf of the River Keepers. I would imagine that any serious bidder in this RFQ process is probably going to retain consultants to assess the economic impact on the community of their bid, as well as the environmental impact and the impact on the grid and the water table and compliance with the Willamette Greenway and the Riparian regs. Is the city going to retain its own consultants for those subjects?
Well, there was a lot of subjects in there. Generally speaking, I would say yes, we will be retaining subject matter experts in those different categories. But there was a lot of categories you touched on. In some cases, we will absolutely have to. In some cases, we have some of the subject matter experts on staff. And so it will probably be a pretty robust combination. And like most things with it, we'll probably do it in somewhat of a team structure. So none of it would be in isolation. Most of it would all be jointly kind of combining knowledge and process.
Well, that's reassuring. I would hate for us to be outgunned by the developers in that regard. So you also touched on residential relocation of displaced residents as a result of whatever the bid is eventually, or whatever the development is. Would it be a declared goal of the city to create housing in Glenwood to relocate the displaced residents, or would they have to go somewhere else in the city?
So I think Christine, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, so we are obligated under state law and the urban renewal plan, and it's also been in the SEDA's board's expressed interest to relocate tenants that are displaced for housing development. The issue with creating specific places for them in the ultimate development project is one of timing. A person is relocated. Our goal policy-wise is to provide them a relocation that is stable and secure, which is going to be happening sooner rather than later in the development timeline. But the constructed housing that might come out of SEDA's project like Courtney said, that could take 5 years on a reasonable development timeline. And so the goal would be to relocate people to housing that complies with our obligations under the state law, but works for them through that process in a place that they can be stable, and then to create more housing opportunities for the community generally through the planning project. It's just not possible timeline wise to relocate people into this project because they have to be moved in order for the development to occur.
Well, all right. So let's say that they have to be moved out temporarily out of the Glenwood community. Would it be the stated goal of the city to create housing that would allow them eventually to move back to the Glenwood community?
I think
That
the
process
goal
would
is
be outside of outside of what we have to do. That kind of a mechanism where we provide them 5 years or so of temporary housing and then permanent housing in the SEDA redevelopment would not probably be consistent with our obligations. And then Courtney can talk about the extent to which that's feasible from an option standpoint.
I think that generally the goal of the refinement plan and even the urban renewal plan is to provide a mix of housing that's accessible to a mix of households.
Mm-hmm.
What we have to be careful of is that we don't tell an individual community member what we think is right for them, and that they may instead actually find an alternative, better scenario in a neighborhood that they don't want to relocate back out of again after. But ultimately, our goal is that we create, through that refinement plan goal, a mix of housing types that's accessible to different income levels. And then folks have the ability to make free choice.
Well, I get that our obligation might not be to find a place in Glenwood for them. I'm just guessing, and I don't want to speak for anybody in Glenwood either. I would guess that somebody who had been displaced and was being relocated out of Glenwood would like eventually to come back. So sometimes what we're obligated to do is not exactly what we should do, and sometimes what we should do exceeds that. That's all I got. Thanks.
I think Mayor.
Yeah, thank you. I guess just a couple of comments. And Leonard, I think there's probably, when I listen to the conversation, I think there's probably 2 different layers of questions, right? Because there's only a handful of homes that are impacted potentially by our property. And then I think you're probably asking a broader question about potential impacts to the broader Glenwood community. And I think our obligations differ in those situations. But like, I want to be really careful not to speak for what people's personal choices are, right? So we, and kind of keep with the requirements that we have. And then if for some reason they do end up with a better spot, then if they want to come back, I think that's their choice, right? But like, we just have to be open that in a 5-year time period, I think there's a lot of different things that could happen. And more broadly, based on the presentation, a couple of things that really jumped out to me, and I think you guys did a really good job of kind of walking through just the sheer amount of public comment and public participation that this process has had up to this point. That doesn't mean that we're going to stop public comment or public participation, but just to understand that there is a lot of public input that has gone to get us to this point, as well as there's a lot of information in the plan that does things that answer questions we get all the time, right? Like, how do we protect access to the riverfront, right? How do we protect water quality, right? Those things all are in the plan and under, land use laws that I think, we're required to follow. So I appreciate a lot of the questions and the input and the participation, but it sounds like really up until this point, we just got to work the plan. We'll get where we want if we work the plan. Thank you.
Courtney?
Yeah.
And one thing that was brought out too is the fact that the refinement plan was the best we could do at the time that we did it, with all the input and goals that we had. It doesn't mean it is a state of perfection, so that there are things that can be done to make it better as time goes on. But if I'm understanding correctly, if amendments were to come up, they would basically be case specific as opposed to a general amendment. Is that, or am I understanding that incorrectly?
You know, it could be both. We won't necessarily know. And in some cases, what we might decide is there's a good reason to efficiently do multiple amendments at once and
Okay.
tackle some things we know we want to adjust, like slight zoning lines at the same time. And that's where us approaching it in partnership with the developer will be important, because if we can have some mutual benefit in that opportunity of getting the work done, and layering it on top of other process, then we're being the most efficient. So I think it's both. And I think we expect to learn some things from developers that we didn't expect. And so that will be helpful. And then we can do some work too at the same time.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Brenny, I think I saw you unmute, which seems like a nonverbal hand raise, but I'm not.
God, next they'll be reading my mind. That's really sucks. Oh, thank
It's
you,
a new
Courtney.
Zoom feature. Didn't you do the update?
Hey, I haven't upgraded from the last upgrade. First, like Leonard, I'd like to, at least out of courtesy, acknowledge Michelle Emmons and her public testimony. I didn't hear anything in there that wouldn't be a part of a responsible moving forward. And I think we should just reiterate that, because I felt that there's the assumption like there's going like this, and I don't think there is. Something I've not heard, things have changed so much. I can't possibly speak to all of this. But now that we're at this point, things have changed so much. I think this might also be a wonderful opportunity, especially I know a little enough to be dangerous, but not that much as Courtney, you and your staff, about some of the sub issues. So I just wanted to say, based on my previous life, this might be a wonderful opportunity to also look at the goal, not that we'll achieve it, but the goal of a net zero development. There are fascinating technologies that are now commercially available that could offload the requirements for a whole different substation or the size of a necessary substation, and interestingly, could decrease the cost of development depending upon what the utilities charges are. I did that in a past life with Universal Studios, where LA Water and Power couldn't possibly, they didn't have the capacity to bring the energy there, and it forced Universal to develop 50 megawatts worth of renewable energy for their site, and they ended up saving them. So I'm just going to encourage, if we can, as this process unfolds, to look at that. Thank you.
I appreciate that discussion, and also in correlation with Michelle's feedback, Willamette Riverkeeper feedback, because I think that there's a couple interesting phases occurring. You know, we're talking about the refinement plan, which really guides the place and the built environment and the process to get there. And we're talking about it as we're talking about a request for qualifications phase, which is really pre that. But a lot of what we're discussing there and sort of, micro grid type infrastructure or net zero development, or even traffic impact analysis, and when the process for public comment on building sizes happens, a lot of that will happen on the other side of selecting the right development partner. All of it will. When we're actually getting into the discussion about the shape of things, which is why this current phase of making sure that we find a partner that understands the process and nuance first is so important, because we want to be able to have these discussions about what if there's a net zero option, or some, low impact, very innovative stormwater treatment facilities. And so I think that's a piece I keep in my mind, is sort of tethering where we are now with these places we hope we get to in conversation with the community and the developer. And I appreciate that the board is thinking about them too, because there'll be heavy conversations. And I think I said some words that triggered our engineer, Kyle. I must have said, yeah, Kyle.
Yeah, I know net zero is often looked at from a power, water, or other related. But moving forward, the way that stormwater is going, it is moving that direction. I mentioned that 2023 permit, and there will be a greater emphasis on essentially the stormwater equivalent of that, which is, retain as much on site as possible through low impact development. We haven't really seen so far like green roofs as much in Springfield, but something, just as one example, I don't want to get hung up on that, but various applications of different types of low impact development that could also fall within that realm of sustainable in its own way. So I wanted to throw that out there.
May I?
Yes.
Thank you, Kyle. That's all cool stuff. Here's another aspect of it, which developers will love. There is significant federal dollars available to offset the costs as it relates to decreasing carbon emissions. And there's significant job creation components as well. That's all. So I'm just adding to what you said. Thank you.
Chair, I'm not necessarily seeing other hands, but I want to look to you.
No, I'm not either.
If there are any other questions or even questions after the fact, as folks have more time to do riveting reading of the whole refinement plan in your spare time, because I know that's what you've been doing. You are always reach out to, yes, Councilor Mel. That does not surprise me. I would say, please reach out to us, ask, have dialogue, have discussions about it, because we're always doing the refresher ourselves. And every time we are partnering with a community member, business owner, or developer, we're at the table rolling our sleeves up at the same time. That's sort of our expectation moving forward of how this is going to go. And it's going to be iterative and always informative. And so we appreciate your engagement on it as well. And we don't have action items as much as it just felt like a good moment to all touch base together, our team with you all, so that we are on the same page as we get ready to move forward into some first time new steps for us. That we start off on that same foot together.
Where'd you go? I want to say thank you for all the work and the people that got involved in doing the presentation for tonight, because I think it was a great overview. That the timing is perfect for us to have that kind of an overview and get the overall view. When you look at the timeline and you look at how long this has gone, this is a perfect timing to do an overview of where we are now as a result of all that input and time. So, and I know that it took a lot of work to put that together for tonight. So thank you.
Marilee, I got a quick question.
Yes.
So we've all been sort of working under a radio silence when it comes to Glenwood right now. And I know we just had this big, interesting conversation about it, but the advice from staff, is it still to not talk about Glenwood, or?
If we're talking, I'll jump in and answer this one. If we're talking about the Glenwood refinement plan or trying to understand the refinement plan, I think that's a different topic. If we're talking about specific, the concern is if we're having too many individualized conversations about the RFQ process that's underway, then it may jeopardize the impartiality or just the process that the board has set out for itself. And so we do want to distinguish between, definitely, if you've got questions about anything, definitely reach out to staff. And if a question is verging into an area where we need to wait for the RFQ process that you've laid out to wrap up and to go through, then Courtney is very capable of differentiating between the two, and we'll talk to you about that. But if there are questions just about the refinement plan generally, or what does information we've presented tonight mean, then that applies. I mean, the refinement plan covers much broader area than what the city and SEDA own, and impacts, lots of different people in different ways. So we can have those broader conversations on an ongoing basis, but we do want to be consistent with the approach you've taken on the RFQ previously.
Thank you for the timely reminder.
Thank you for the timely reminder.
Thank you both for the timely reminder.
I don't see any more questions as to that. Oh, Steve?
I'm always talking about the time element, okay? Greenland Urban Renewal Plan was 2004. Refinement Plan is 2012. And we're talking about another 5 years. That's 22 years, maybe. And so that's the way it's going. I like it. And those are facts. Okay.
That was the only item we had, wasn't it, Courtney?
Yep, that's the only item from staff.
Then with no further questions, I will adjourn the meeting of SEDA. Thank you.
Thank you.